I always thought my mind-reading ability was a blessing. I could hear the true feelings of people who didn't care for me. Their voices were clear, unfiltered, and it made it easy to distance myself from the fake people in my life. But on the eve of my wedding, something happened that shook me to my core. I had been hearing my fiancé's voice in my head for days, but it wasn't the sweet, loving tone I was used to. No, this time it was different. His inner voice was cold, calculating. If she tries to steal my wedding tomorrow, it will be difficult for me to escape wearing leather shoes. His words hit me like a slap in the face. He wasn't talking to me, but I could hear it loud and clear. I froze, unsure how to react. I was getting married the next day, yet I found myself boarding a flight to another country. The wedding was supposed to be the culmination of everything we'd worked for, but suddenly it felt like a joke, a cruel joke. Both of us, me and Alan, were to escape, and the whole city would be laughing. You see, for as long as I can remember, I've had this special ability. I can hear people's inner voices, those who don't love me. It's a strange gift, but it's been my reality. It helps me avoid fake relationships, whether it's a so-called friendship or a romantic confession. Even when I'm shopping for durian, I know which one is the sweetest just by listening to the vendor's thoughts. But then came Alan. When I met him, I couldn't hear a thing. The world around us was silent, except for the soft words we exchanged. Our first meeting was peaceful, almost too perfect. I had never been able to read his mind, but I'd never questioned it. We fell in love, dated for 2 years, and even planned our wedding together. I trusted him completely. His thoughts were a mystery, but I didn't mind. I believed in him. But on the eve of our wedding, everything changed. Alan had been busy lately running a family business, managing his father's company. We hadn't seen each other much in the last few months. He was so caught up in his work that I hardly felt like his fiancé anymore. But today, I thought it would be different. We were going to finalize our wedding attire together. He was already at the studio when I arrived, trying on shoes. He looked so confident, chatting with the staff and taking phone calls. I couldn't help but admire him for how well he managed everything. And then, it happened. As we stood there, Alan's voice cut through my thoughts. Rena said we're going to grab the wedding tomorrow. It's more convenient to wear sneakers. Rena. The name echoed in my mind, and I was struck by the sudden realization. He wasn't just talking about our wedding. He was planning to run away with someone else. The worst part? It was all in his mind, and I could hear it all too clearly. Rena. She was his first love, a name I'd heard only in passing, but now I understood. She was back in his life, and suddenly I was nothing more than a placeholder. Alan's thoughts made it crystal clear. I was never meant to be his true love. I couldn't stay quiet. My body moved without thinking, chasing after Alan as he walked away. I called his name, desperate for an explanation. But when he turned, his words were cold, a lie wrapped in urgency. Sorry, there's an emergency with a client. I have to rush over. But his inner voice told a different story. I know Rena's angry. If I don't coax her, she won't let me back into her life. I need to prove myself to her, to make her believe that I never stopped loving her. I didn't know how to process it all. I'd been a fool. I had spent years believing in a love that wasn't even real. Alan had moved on, and I was nothing but a convenient distraction. That night, I packed my bags and booked a flight out of the country. They wanted to steal my wedding? Fine. I would disappear, and they could have each other. I'd never wanted this life. I was going to leave everything behind. The next day, as the wedding approached, I knew I had to escape. I had no intention of being part of their game. Alan could have his first love, and I could have my freedom. Cassie, my best friend, helped me pack, offering a silent support that meant everything. And then, on the day of the wedding, Alan's voice was like a constant hum in my ears. Is Rena here? I can finally be with Rena. I've been waiting for 3 years for this moment. The words made my blood run cold. Excuse me, how could I have been so blind? I looked at him one last time, my heart heavy with betrayal, and then I turned away. The wedding wasn't for me. It was for him and for Rena. And as I walked out, I knew there was no turning back. I always had an unusual gift, a kind of sixth sense, if you will. One that allowed me to hear the hidden thoughts of those who didn't truly care for me. It was both a blessing and a curse, and I could sense the insincerity in people, and it was impossible to ignore. It helped me avoid toxic relationships and dodged fake smiles, but it also made me wary of love. The one person I thought had crossed that barrier was Alan. We'd been together for 2 years, and during that time, I had never once heard the voice of doubt in his mind. It was perfect. Too perfect, I thought. But maybe I was just being paranoid. We were about to marry. I'd chosen my dress, arranged the venue, and everything was set. Or so I thought. Then, the night before the wedding, I heard his voice. It wasn't a thought meant for me. It was his inner monologue, and I couldn't mistake it. If she tries to steal my wedding tomorrow, it'll be hard to escape wearing leather shoes. My heart sank as the world seemed to tilt around me. Alan, the man I was about to marry, was plotting to leave me for another woman, and that woman wasn't some stranger. It was Rena, the girl from his past, his first love. I stood frozen, unsure of how to process the wave of betrayal that crashed over me. The next morning, I made a choice. I wasn't going to be part of their sick game. I'd disappear before the wedding ever began. When I arrived at the studio, Alan was already there, casually getting fitted for shoes. He was talking to the staff, giving orders, his tone as sweet as ever, but I could hear his thoughts clearly. I'll grab the wedding tomorrow. It's easier to wear sneakers. Sneakers? For our wedding, I nearly choked. The pieces clicked into place. The whole wedding, all the planning, was nothing more than a facade. Rena wanted to snatch him away in front of everyone, humiliate me. I felt the coldness spread through my limbs as I saw them together. Alan was too busy for me lately, always wrapped up in his family business, but this was different. I caught a glimpse of him slipping sneakers into the wedding outfit. The plan was set. He'd walk down the aisle with Rena, and I'd be left behind, made the fool. I couldn't just stand there. My mind raced as I followed Alan, calling out his name. Alan! He turned, trying to brush me off. Sorry, there's an emergency. He lied, but his thoughts betrayed him. I know she's angry, but I have to handle this. If I don't, Rena won't forgive me. That's when I realized he wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. He had already made his decision. I wasn't the one he wanted. He needed me as a cover until Rena returned. And now she was here, ready to claim what she thought was hers. I couldn't stay. I wouldn't stay. The guests were arriving, the ceremony about to begin, but I was packing my bags, ready to leave the life I thought I had. I'd booked a flight for the next morning, first class, of course. I couldn't be part of this twist. It wasn't my wedding. It never was. I barely told anyone, just Cassie, my best friend. She wasn't thrilled about my decision, but she helped me prepare, her silence echoing the magnitude of my plan. You're really doing this? She asked, a hint of disbelief in her voice. Absolutely, I replied. They want a show? I'll give them one. Cassie, always the troublemaker, smirked and handed me a box. If you're going, take this. It was a sack of urea, her family's business. Oddly practical for a hasty exit, the wedding started, but when the doors opened, I was nowhere to be seen. The guests murmured, but it wasn't until the big screen flashed a message in bright red that the chaos began. Escape statement. Because Alan cheated with his mistress, Rena, I've decided to leave the wedding. I hope you two will find happiness together. The room erupted. I could almost hear the collective gasp as my words hit the screen. I had made my exit and my statement clear. It was the final laugh at the farce they tried to pull. Meanwhile, Alan and Rena stood on stage, holding hands, looking like the perfect couple. But everything had fallen apart. The guests were no longer focused on their so-called love story. They were looking for me. It didn't take long before the chaos spread. Alan and Rena were caught in the spotlight they never asked for, and I was already miles away, boarding my flight. The text from Cassie came in quickly. Mission accomplished, Zoe. Hong Kong is in chaos. The two idiots are still stuck on stage while everyone's looking for you. I laughed as I settled into my seat. The flight was long, but it was peaceful. I didn't have to deal with the mess back home anymore. And the Du family would have to face the consequences of their actions. Alan, Rena, and their little game. They thought they were playing the system, but I just flipped the script. As I landed and turned my phone back on, I saw the fallout. My family was already waiting for me at the airport, their support unwavering. Cassie sent me a flurry of updates about the wedding disaster. I just saw the hot search, she said. Your statement is everywhere. They're calling Alan and Rena the most embarrassing couple in Hong Kong right now. I smiled as I read the messages. Alan had lost more than just his bride. He'd lost his dignity, and Rena had shown everyone who she truly was. The real joke wasn't on me, it was on them. I didn't need to be the bride anymore. My parents and I are from Hong Kong, and though they are already aging, their bodies can no longer handle long international flights. I had returned on a business trip to reconnect with my roots, never expecting to meet the man I thought I was destined to be with. That night, Alan called me over, holding a glass of red wine, wearing a gentle smile and a cool demeanor. I rarely initiate conversations in public, especially in noisy places like bars, as I can read people's thoughts. But Alan's mind was quiet. Strangely, I could not hear a single thought from him, and as I looked at him, a patience I hadn't known I had began to grow. Later, when Alan confessed his love, he was shy, unsure where to place his hands and feet, the rose in his hand trembling slightly. "Zoe, I will treat you well for the rest of my life," he promised one. We locked eyes, but I could no longer read his heart. That was a first for me still. I nodded, believing him, willing to stay in the country and marry him. In that moment, I never doubted his promise. But promises only hold weight when they are backed by love. And Alan's and Raina's love story was never about mutual devotion. It was a tale of unrequited love, of a youth clinging to illusions. Raina may not have been as beautiful as Alan imagined, and perhaps Alan didn't love her as deeply as he thought. True love is most touching when it is unreturned. Half a month later, after finishing a design class with Professor Parson, I received a call from Cassie. I had just received an invitation to Alan's wedding. I had assumed it was just another formal event, but when I arrived, I realized it was far from what I expected. The ceremony was held in a secondary hall, not as grand as the one I remembered. Alan's father didn't show and many guests were absent. Alan's mother, who had come, was clearly displeased, sipping her tea with a cold stare. She didn't even offer red envelopes, let alone congratulations. Instead, she scolded Raina in front of everyone, calling her to be obedient, to follow the rules. It was almost laughable to hear her lecture, so full of pretension. Raina, clearly upset, dropped her bouquet. Alan had to juggle comforting both his wife and mother. Watching it all unfold was a bizarre spectacle. The whole wedding had the feel of a formality, done only because Raina had somehow convinced Alan's mother, and as it turned out, their marriage was nothing but a facade. Cassie told me that Raina had been inserting herself into Alan's company, growing her own business under the protection of the Yu family and gaining recognition. I had worked hard to help Alan in the past, but now it seemed like Raina had taken all the rewards. I couldn't help but feel bitter. Later, my assistant went to China on my behalf and secured the project. However, there was some news from Alan. He was now divorced. I had a feeling it would happen, but it still surprised me to hear it so soon. The dissolution of their marriage made me reflect on everything Alan had said. "Raina has changed," he had once remarked, but the truth was, it wasn't Raina who had changed. She had just stopped fitting into Alan's unrealistic fantasy. When he called me again, I was indifferent. I was done with him. Our past was long gone. I had nothing left to give him, no unresolved feelings. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in revisiting our past. He apologized for what had happened, for betraying me, but it was too late. I wasn't going to open that door again. I knew what he wanted, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. 2 months later, after hearing about Alan's divorce, I received an unexpected message. It was from him, asking to meet. When I ran into him by chance at the mall, I barely recognized the man standing in front of me. He looked worn out, a far cry from the confident man I once knew. His aura had changed. He was no longer the golden boy of the Du family, but when I saw him there, standing in front of me with that sad smile, I realized how much he had lost. His life had crumbled. His career, once so promising, was now in tatters. And it seemed that love had abandoned him too. He tried to make small talk, but I kept things polite, distant. I wasn't the same person I once was. I had moved on, built a new life with my family. As I spoke to him, I realized that his past and his feelings didn't matter to me anymore. I was living a new reality. When he handed Laura a copy of The Little Prince, I couldn't help but think of the symbolism. Alan had once been my prince, but now he was just a man lost in his regrets. As I left, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. My memories of him, once painful, were now just part of a distant past, something that no longer held any sway over me. I had given him a quiet exit from my life. and that was the final revenge. For him, I would remain the rose that he could never have, the one that slipped away. And in his world, I would forever be a lost love, a dream that never came true. As I returned to my family, I realized that this was the end of our story. Alan's regrets would be his own to carry. For me, I had my own life now, one filled with love, happiness, and new beginnings. And that was all that mattered.